Hello and welcome to the Ramblings of a 42-Year-Old Man. Chris Smith here with you today. We are going to continue our Final Fantasy coverage. So we're jumping back into the mainline series after taking a quick sidestep into Final Fantasy Tactics last week. So we are back on with Final Fantasy VIII. So we'll get into some of the development, some of the gameplay, the characters, the story modes. This one will probably be very similar to our Final Fantasy VII one. It's a large game. It's not quite as big as 7 or even 6, I think, because a good chunk of this game you spend doing side quests and really technically one main side quest, which is a card game, which we'll get into. But the story itself is not so large as they have been with these. So hopefully this one will maybe be a two-parter rather than jumping up into 3 like we did with 6. And we'll see. We can do this over a couple days. So we'll go ahead and get started with some of the background and development of Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy VIII was released in 1999. It was released for the PlayStation 1 system. So this would be the second PlayStation exclusive Final Fantasy after Final Fantasy VII. Well, if you could add Tactics in there as well, I guess technically this will be your third Final Fantasy game on a PlayStation 1 system. Directed by Yoshinori Kitase. Now, he had done 6 as a co-director, and he had done 7 all by himself. So now he comes back in to do Final Fantasy VIII. Music, again, by Nobuo Uematsu. Now, this is the first Final Fantasy we have that has a spoken word song in it, and that is Eyes on Me. Final Fantasy VII had the One-Winged Angel Sephiroth song, which had some kind of like chorus background, like almost like monks chanting kind of, but no actual spoken English words. This was actually a English language with lyrics and everything song called Eyes on Me. Uematsu has called it his favorite piece of music that he's done for Final Fantasy. Also pretty famous for the music in here is Liberali Fatali, which is kind of, again, a kind of a chorus background song. It's kind of like the sorcerer's theme of this game, and it's very intense. It actually is the opening sequence of the game is to this music, and that's a pretty big one too. So the music of Final Fantasy VIII, following along as we have throughout the entire series, is just really good. And yeah, that'll take us into the gameplay of Final Fantasy VIII, and we'll see what changes there are in this one. So when it comes to gameplay, we got a lot of stuff still the same. You know, you got your world map, you got your random battles, you got your active time system like we've had ever since Final Fantasy IV, where everything is going on in real time as you go. You have your experience, you have levels, you have hit points. Now, a little difference here, you don't have magic points. Magic in this game is very different. So you don't have MPs, you actually draw magic out of your enemies during battle, or you can find little draw points, as they call them, on the map where you can also draw spells. And then when we get into some of the side questing, especially that card game, we'll talk about where else you can get a lot of magic spells. But rather than magic points, there's actually numbers of spells that you can use. So let's say you do a draw on an enemy and you pull out fire. You pull out 5 fire spells. Well, guess what? You now have 5 fire spells. And you can draw those up until you own 100 of every spell. So now weapons in this game also are a little different. You don't buy new weapons every time you get to like a town and there's a new shop or something, but you can upgrade your weapons with items or tools that you discover throughout the game, usually dropped by enemies or things that you can modulate from other items as well. We'll talk about the way the summons are in this game. They're a little different as well. They're called GFs. And what these GFs do, they all have abilities, and some of those abilities can actually modulate other items into either other items or items into magic, things like that. So there's a lot of kind of configuring and stuff that you can do with these skills that these GFs can learn. No armor in this game, so you've got the upgradable weapons, you got no armor. And another big difference, your enemies actually level up along with the character. So in most Final Fantasies, it's like, oh, level up, so you can get really strong and beat everybody. Well, unfortunately, in this game, it's similar to Skyrim. The enemies actually level up with you. So the more you level yourself up, the higher these enemies are going to get too, which in some cases is almost better to stay lower level. In fact, I know there's a group of people out there, when they play this game, the challenge is to keep your levels as low as you possibly can. That way those enemies also stay as weak as they possibly can as well. So we talked a little bit about magic, how you draw from enemies. You take these magic, and the way that the GFs or those summons I talked about work, you equip those on characters, and certain things that they will learn will actually let you add these magics to your stats. And by you add a strong enough magic to a certain stat, it'll boost it pretty high. So rather than gaining levels and getting your stats that way, the best way to really level up and maximize your characters is through junctioning these magic spells onto your stats and making them really high that way. It's a very complicated system, but once you kind of get the handle of it, it's not too bad. But you do spend a lot of time playing around with that system to get your highest stats you can with the magic you have. And then that brings us to the triple triad card game, which is kind of the main side quest for Final Fantasy VIII. You will almost spend as many hours playing this card game as you will playing the actual game if you're trying to get as big and much stats as you can, the highest upgraded weapons you can, all the items that you want to be able to get. A lot of it comes through having this card game, and then you can mod these cards into different items, different magic spells, different things. So obviously the more cards you earn, the more things you can modulate into better and stronger items. It's a lot. It is a big side quest. Luckily, the card game is fun for most people, but yes, it is a big chunk of time going on there. So there's your gameplay for Final Fantasy VIII. We'll jump into characters next. Going into the characters of Final Fantasy VIII, we're going to begin with our protagonists. So we have Squall Leonhardt. He is your main protagonist. He's your Cloud of Final Fantasy VIII. He's kind of a loner. He has some leadership skills, but he's not a very people person. He uses this gun blade that's pretty cool, and he's a student at what they call Garden, which is kind of like it's a school. It's a name for a school. And he's very depressed all the time, it seems like. Yeah, he's very his personality takes a lot to get him to open up, but yeah, so that's the main character, Squall. You'll be playing as him pretty much just about the majority of the game. Second, when it comes to main characters, would be Rinoa. Now Rinoa is kind of Squall's love interest, I guess you could say, in the game. She is a resistance leader of her town that is under kind of the rule of the government that's near her town, kind of runs her town. She wants to lead her people out of being underneath this government. So she's a resistance leader. Throughout the game, she will end up hiring Squall and his team of mercenaries to come help her, and then she'll kind of join along with them, and eventually her and Squall end up falling for each other by the end of the game. The romance plot is a big chunk of this game as well. So that's Rinoa. All right, next on our character list is Quistis. Now, Quistis is a instructor at the school, at the garden, as you might say. She's only like a year older than the students, so she's very young for an instructor, but she ends up joining the crew at some point as one of our team members, and she carries around a whip and is able to kind of do damage in that fashion. All right, next on our character list is Zeldinch. He's a martial artist. He fights with his fists. He's very energetic, pretty much annoying kind of character with how much energy that he has. But he ends up, honestly, most of the time I play these games, I almost always play with Squall and Rinoa, and then I end up with either Zell or Quistis. Probably Zell more often than not. I like that martial arts skills they have. I'll tell you, the characters are pretty interchangeable because of that magic system and boosting the stats and stuff. Obviously, you've got Squall locked in most of the time, but you can rotate just about anybody else you want in and out, and you're not going to really get affected that hard because the skill levels are all kind of based on the kind of magic and stuff that you have equipped onto your system. So other than whatever kind of cool weapon you want to use, really the characters that you choose to use with, there's not a whole lot of difference across the board with them. Selphie is the next in their characters. She is a transfer student from another garden or school. Hers was a Trebia garden, and she transfers over to Balam garden, which is where the rest of our protagonists are from, except for Rinoa. Rinoa does not go to school at the garden. Everybody else does, though. And so she is just transferred into our garden at the beginning of the game and ends up joining our troop as we move along. And the last of our core group is Irvin Kinius. He is actually a student at another garden. This one is Galbadia Garden. It's kind of a rival garden to ours, but he joins our team eventually on a mission that is kind of a co-mission between the two gardens that we have, and he ends up sticking around for the rest of the game as well. And that kind of rounds out our protagonist group. We do have a couple extra characters we'll talk about, and then also we'll get into some of our antagonists as well. So there are a couple extra characters that we will play through the game. At different spots, our characters will kind of like pass out or fall asleep, and we will have visions of these three characters sometime in the past. And they're led by Laguna. He is a Galbadian soldier at the beginning, and eventually he turns into like a reporter, and eventually he turns into a president of a country. So he's got a pretty big story arc, and we're seeing most of it through visions that we end up having throughout the game. He's accompanied with Kiros and Ward, kind of his two, I think they're kind of co-soldiers at the beginning, and then they're friends, so they kind of stay in touch as they go along through the game as well. So we'll see them a lot in visions and stuff that we're getting, and we'll figure out why we're getting these visions and stuff eventually in the game as well. Now, antagonist-wise, we have Cypher, who's kind of our rival student at the garden, and we also have the sorceress Edea, and eventually they end up joining forces, and we're having to fight them through most of the game. We'll get into why and how that all happens as we get into the story part of the game, which we will jump into next. So our story of Final Fantasy VIII opens with a cutscene. It starts with a lot of different flashes and stuff that we're going to see as we go ahead and play through the game, but kind of the main story part of this cutscene at the beginning is the fight between Squall and Cypher. They're technically sparring against each other, but while they're sparring, they both end up actually hurting each other. Squall gets cut by Cypher, Squall retaliates and cuts Cypher back. They both end up, with scars on their faces throughout the rest of the game. And so Quistis, who comes and kind of gets Squall out of the hospital wing after this fight with Cypher, takes him on to a kind of a training mission to recover a GF called Ifrit. And this is where we kind of learn like how you junction your GFs and the skills you can learn from them and how you will equip magic onto your stats and stuff like that. We'll start to get all that background of how that works. When we get back to the garden, we'll meet Selphie. We'll also meet the headmaster, Sid. We'll get our first assignment, which is technically a CD test mission. Now, I say CD. I think it might be seed, which makes sense if we're all going to garden. We're all seeds, right? But I've always said CD is S-E-E and then a capital D at the end of it. But so if I say CD sometimes instead of seed, I'll apologize. But we're all trying to become seeds, which is kind of a mercenary force that takes on jobs, and these jobs, the income that they get from it supplements the garden, which of course, is able to make it be able to continue to teach more students. So we go ahead and get our testing mission, which we are going to get sent to the city of Dalit. So for our testing mission, unfortunately, Squall and Zell end up becoming on the same squad as Cypher, and Cypher is named squad leader. So we have to follow him as we're going into the city of Dalit. They're currently going through some sort of invasion by this kind of country, or I don't know if the country or city, how you consider these things, but the land of Galbadia is kind of infiltrating Dalit. And, the CD, even though it's a test, it really is real battle. We're fighting against actual soldiers from Galbadia and stuff. While we're doing this, Cypher gets kind of bored of kind of waiting we're kind of covering this one area, and he's really bored of waiting, so he runs off, which great, our squad leader just ran off. Fortunately, Selphie runs into us and she tells us, hey, we're all retreating. Galbadia is here for this communication tower. They've told Dalit if they're allowed to have this communication tower, they will pull back the troops and stop invading, so we're to pull back as well. So we end up attempting to pull back. Cypher has kind of run off, so we have to go after him. We get in some fights with some Galbadia soldiers on the communication tower, and then eventually we're in retreat, and we run out and run off of away from Dalit. And that's our CD test, which sounds like it's possibly a failure, but depending on the things that you do during that test, whether you're listening to your squad leader, whether when you're given to the notice that it's time to retreat, how fast you're able to retreat, if you're screwing around by talking to other characters or people that are standing around, rather than just focusing on the mission, you'll earn points. And by the end of this test, you have a certain amount of points that will lead to kind of your salary when you become a seed, which we will, by the end of this test, officially become seeds. So during the kind of the celebration of our seed graduation, we meet Renoa for the first time. There's a whole dance scene between her and Squall, and it's kind of our first introduction to her. And then she runs off, and that's all we'll see of her for a little bit. But we do get our first mission from Headmaster Sid. Is to go to the town of Timber and help a resistance group there called the Timber Owls, Timber Forest Owls. And they are also kind of resisting against this Galbadian rule that they have. Evidently, this country of Galbadia is almost not quite empire-like, but they're definitely in a expansion mode kind of deal. So on our way to Timber to take on this contract, we fall asleep and we have our first vision of Laguna and Kirsten Ward. They're running through some Galbadian forest. They got their armor on and stuff. They've obviously been in some sort of battle and gotten lost in this forest. But they escape out. They find their way back to the capital of Galbadia, where there's a whole scene with Laguna and a piano-playing girl that he's kind of enamored with. So that's our first kind of introduction to Laguna and his friends. So we wake up We arrive at Timber. We meet Renoa for officially in the capacity that we are going to be helping her and her resistance team try to, whatever we can to help them resist this Galbadian rule that they're trying to do. So their plan, as it is the president supposedly of Galbadia is coming through the area on a train. We are going to intercept his train, hook it up to our fake train, and then take off with it and officially kidnap the president. Seems like a big plan. It's very we're noticing that these guys are very amateurish in their resistance, but we're there to help and we're going to go through this plan. Unfortunately, what we find out is the president has found out about this plan, and so there's a fake president on there that we end up having to fight, and we kind of get out of that situation. And as we do, we see that there is a television broadcast coming across. This is the reason that Galbadia was after that communication tower in Dalit. They wanted to be able to broadcast this, whatever messages that they're trying to do, which nobody has broadcast over TV in this game anyway for a long time. So while they're having this broadcast, the Galbadian president kind of introduces the sorceress Idia as his military leader. Idia, yeah, I think that's how you say it. While they're doing this introduction, though, all of a sudden Cypher comes running out of nowhere on screen. We see him, we're like, what the heck? And then we see Quistis is coming behind him. Cypher kind of attacks the sorceress and the president, and Quistis kind of looks at the screens like, Timber team, I know that you're sitting on your mission, but you are to get here right now. Your orders are to get here right now. And luckily, this TV station is really near Timber. So we go in and we are there just in time to see Cypher kind of get mind controlled a little bit by the sorcerers, and they both disappear. And so we end up, Quistis kind of joins up our group now. Renoa is still with us as well. And we've decided that we've got new orders to go to Galbadia Garden to kind of regroup and see what our next steps are. And because of, the way that the whole thing with the president went down, I guess Renoa is not comfortable just going back to Timber, so she's coming with us. And so we head over to Galbadia Garden to receive our next mission from the headmaster there, who has been in contact with our headmaster at our garden. All right, so we're going to go ahead and stop right now for this part. This will be part 1 of our Final Fantasy VIII coverage. We'll pick up with part 2 tomorrow, and we'll just pick up right from here, heading up to find what our next set of orders are for our next mission. And we'll continue off with the remainder of the game. We'll be able to fit it into one more session. As I said, I'm going through the plot here fairly quickly. There's not a whole lot else going on. There's little side trips here and there as you go through, but this is the main thrust of the plot as we're going forward. We'll get into some crazy memory situations and some bombs and some prisons and some we'll get up into space, and then we'll finally have some crazy time compression final battle thing going on. And the plot will get nuts, everything will get a little crazy, but we'll wrap that all up tomorrow. So thank you for watching today. Please check out the part 2 of the Final Fantasy VIII tomorrow, and let me know what you think. Thank you for listening to me ramble, and I will see you all later.